you show up in class and you have a white teacher, let's just say Miss Griswell. Okay, Miss Griswell, 30-something-year-old white woman, brown bob, and she greets you at the door and she's like, I usually prefer to teach white students, but I think we'll be okay with you, class. Would you say that's just a preference, or would you say that's racist?
Definitely. Hey guys, hey. Are you a Delta? Yes. Hi. Hi everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Webb. Should I call you Dr. Webb or Sarah? Or Dr. Sarah?
You call me Sarah. You can call me Sarah.
Okay. I want to put some respect on the doctor now.
Yeah, I say, Black women and women of color can call me Sarah.
Okay, yeah. Address me as such. I understand that. How are you doing today? Happy Thursday.
You too. I'm doing good today. Yeah. I'm like the coast.
Huh?
I'm liking the East Coast.
Oh, yeah. Where do you originally live?
I'm originally from Louisiana. I lived in Illinois most recently and spent a long 4 months in Texas right before coming to New York. So.
Okay. What part of Texas?
Dallas, the
okay.
DFW.
I have friends in Dallas and Lancaster, all those surrounding areas.
I like it. I like the vibe in Dallas.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, thank you for joining us and bringing in your expertise with this very important topic because, child, it's one of the things for me is I grew up in a very Afrocentric household, and I have parents. My mom is Panamanian, and then my dad's family is from St. Croix. So for me, we've always learned about the struggles of the African diaspora, and that was always at the forefront of just anything that my parents would talk about, because we had to understand, the enemy that we were really fighting, right? It's not each other. Okay. It's a bigger monster. So just growing up for me was always, we've always had a lot of pride within ourselves and within our community, as well as understand that there's been things placed, amongst us as Black people to cause self-hate as well as hatred amongst ourselves. So I recently, we talked before, I recently did a reality TV show called Ready to Love. And it was a dating show. And I mean, in everyday dating for me, it's always, you kind of always feel and see, even though it's unspoken, the preferences well, when it comes to light versus dark skin women, or vice versa, light versus dark skinned men, because this is just go one way. So when I did the show, for me, I felt I brought my authentic and real self, and one of the things that happened was I became friends with two women that were of a darker hue, and because we took a picture together and we loved the picture, we were like, okay, melanin, yes, it's popping, because we look good. We look good in that picture. And we had all these bright colors, and it was nice. So our skin, the sun loves popping, everything was beautiful. We decided to name our friendship group Brown Girl Squad. Well, although, and this is just how I felt that the Brown Girl Squad did not personally interfere with anything that was going on in terms of the dating competition. The women that were of lighter complexion felt left out, excluded from our friendship group. And it wasn't, we weren't excluding them, which I don't feel like I ever had a chance to explain that, because nobody personally brought that to me, but we weren't excluding them because of their complexion. it was because we just weren't friends, right? If you're not a part of the friend group, then you really can't be in what we're calling the Brown Girl Squad. So, of course, the show got a hold of that, and it started being a lot of things thrown around where it was talking about reverse colorism, where they were talking about somebody even called me a colorist, and I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So I felt like we had a few times where we had breakthrough conversations about colorism, because even like one of the guys on the show, he was known for dating white women, and that was like a conversation that was brought up because you know, it was things that just people had to become more aware of, like, why is this your preference? You know, like, why it's a lot deeper than just saying like, oh, that's just what I like. You know,
right.
that just I think people like were constantly talking about amongst themselves. And what I feel like was missed, the mark that was missed, especially on this reunion, and you're probably not watching it, you know what, don't. But what was missed, the mark that was missed on the reunion, was there was a clear like pathway, a clear time that we could have had a very educational conversation, and a conversation that would have impacted the entire community who was watching. And I don't feel like we used the platform in an efficient way or effective way. And because that mark was missed, I felt the need to give you a call, to hit you up, to seek you out. I had been kind of like watching your work before the show, just because at the end of the day, like, I know that this is a struggle in the Black community. But once this opportunity presented itself, I was like, okay, well, let me call in someone that could actually eloquently speak to, you know, what is happening, and hopefully we can, you know, people can learn from this, and we can grow from this. And I'm always about that. So I do want you to introduce yourself. I just wanted to give that spiel really quickly. I've in my story, I posted a picture of me and my family, and how we're like of every complexion. And it's never been a day where I looked at a person, and I'm not saying I don't see color, but I never looked at a person and decided to hate them because of the color of their skin. Right. So when I was being accused of that, it really hurt me deeply, because I was like, yo, I have like sisters that are that are lighter than the people that's on this show. You know, like, I have cousins, I have aunties, I have people that raised me, that love me, and we never, in my family, because of our experiences, we weren't allowed to have these preferences and put one person over the other because of the complexion of their skin. At the end of the day, your family, we love you, period. Right. So that's not always the case, and I know that. But I was lucky enough, I was able to grow up in a family that understood what was going on and recognized it, but we did not put those practices in place. So I'm gonna stop talking now. Sorry. I'm a chatty Patty, so I'm gonna be dealing with your time. I'm gonna definitely watch the time and make sure I respect it. But I do want you to introduce yourself. Let the people know, you know, just run down your credentials so they can understand who they're speaking to, who they're listening to, and why it's important to take away, to sit and listen. Sorry.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's fine for you to be a chatty Patty, because everything you say is like so spot on and makes so much sense. You know, some people talk a lot and they're not saying nothing. Yeah. At least you actually saying something. So your little introduction was like really engaging and informative. And so I was excited when you reached out to me, because, you know, we see colorism playing out in the media all the time, and it's not unheard of for it to happen in dating, right? And so that's actually like those two things coming together is really sort of, I think, a core space where we see colorism so often. And it's funny because earlier you said, you know, it's not always explicitly stated, but in my observations, I hear a lot of people explicitly state their so-called preferences, and sometimes in a not so kind way at that. So who am I? I'm Dr. Sarah L. Webb. Black women can call me Sarah, although many of them still choose to call me Dr. Webb. I get it.
Listen, we just want to respect you, sis. You work hard.
That's true. That's true. Also, really quickly, I'll say the reason why I don't shy away from saying that I'm Dr. Sarah Webb is because there's some little Black girls around here who need that representation, right? So I'm like, yeah, they should know that there's, a professor or, someone with a PhD who looks like them. And so I got interested in talking about colorism around 2011. So obviously I have experienced it myself individually, and I also have an extended family that runs the gamut in terms of skin tones. We're from South Louisiana. I have an older sister. We have the same mother and father, because that's the question you get a lot too. If your sister's a different color than you, it's like, well, maybe y'all got different daddies, right? It's like we have, that's how genetics works, folks. Like people can have the DNA and look different. And so I definitely saw people outside of our family treated us differently, right? So even though there was love in the home, because we were, both girls around the same age, like it was very clear that people would interact with her differently than me. And so I saw it, in school, on TV, of course, but I was not talking about it, and especially back then, right? And so again, thank you for using your platform today, because it was like, am I seeing this? Is no one else seeing this, right? Am I the only one who's seeing this? But then in 2011, I was teaching high school at a predominantly Black high school in my hometown, and I heard my students saying colorist things about themselves. They were saying colorist things about other people, like things like, I'm less proud of myself because I got darker with the summer, right? And so it's like,
Ooh, I hate that. Ugh.
Right? I was so hurt to see that it was still happening, because part of me was like, maybe that was in the past, like now that I'm an adult, maybe I just won't see it anymore. But then I woke up to the fact, like, this is going to continue in my community if we don't do anything. And so that was also the same year that the Bill Duke documentary came out, Dark Girls. And I was like, okay, it's time to say something, right? And so, after writing a couple of blog posts, I decided to create a website dedicated to just colorism. And that is what colorism healing is today. It's evolved. I do a lot of workshops, online webinars and trainings and in-person things. I've been publishing books. I have an international writing contest that I host every year, because even though we might focus on African Americans in our conversation today, I think it's good for people to know that it happens all over the world in groups of different races and different nationalities. And that's what inspired me to go back to get my PhD, was when I found this issue, this subject of colorism. I was like, that's enough for me to dedicate an extra 4 years of studying, and writing and things like that. My mission is just to raise awareness so that everybody can understand colorism, but then also to empower people to implement solutions in their own spaces, right? So in your family or at your workplace or in your school, in your Greek organization, right? Like, take the information and tools I'm giving and sharing, and then go start those conversations with your people too.
Yeah, that's very important. And as a person that has lived in the South, I'm from Atlanta, and then I was school in Houston. Those conversations have always made me worrisome. Especially when people are like, oh, like I have two line sisters. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I have two line sisters that are sisters. And one has 3C hair, and the other one has 4C hair, and they're two different complexions. And one of the things that people would say is how y'all sisters? I was just like, hey, so this is how genetics work. It's literally, we have so many different genes in our systems and in our bodies, and it's just it comes out any kind of way. I have a lighter complected nephew that my younger sister had, and both of her parents are of darker complexion, and people are like, how did he come out that way? I'm like, this is what Black people do. This is the beauty of Black, honestly.
Well, that's what Black people do.
Run the world, baby. What do you think? What do you think is happening? So I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. I'm glad that you're able to bring your expertise to this platform, so we can really just start doing the work. And I hope, and my prayer for tonight is that people have watched this show and they've seen what happened, and or they're just here just to listen in,
Mm-hmm.
and they're able to do exactly what you said, take something away from this and start to do the work within the communities that they're a part of. So one of the things that I wanted to first start off with is, of course, we have to define what colorism is, so we can actually know how to use the term, right? Because when people started calling me a colorist, I was like, hey, so I don't think you know what colorism is. Like even if I was being prejudiced towards lighter complected people, that is not colorism. Right? It's not going both ways, baby. So I do want you to let me stop talking and act like I'm the expert. Go ahead and if you can define colorism for us.
Yeah, so I'll start with the definition and then try to explain the definition. So colorism is a system, that's a key word, and it's a social hierarchy, social stratification, right? So you have like layers in the society. And those layers, those hierarchies are based on skin tone in such a way that if you have lighter skin, you are elevated in the hierarchy. And if you have darker skin, you are relegated to the bottom of the hierarchy, right? And then, you know, a lot of times I emphasize that hair texture can influence, right? Like where you fall on the spectrum, you know, facial features and all that stuff. But it's, you know, a lot of people would not say racism goes both ways, right? A lot of Black people would not say racism goes both ways. And so we have to, I think as a community, start to treat colorism with the same importance and significance and gravity that we treat racism. And we might get into this later, but when we look at things like racial inequality, there's research that shows there's similar, parallel, often equal inequality and disparities just amongst us as Black people based on skin tone. So it's just as important as racism. And we know that, you know, racism requires not just prejudice, but power and historic legacy of exercising that power. And so colorism is not about prejudice alone. It's also about that social hierarchy that I was talking about.
Right. I love that. So with, just like you were saying, reverse racism, like, is it possible to have reverse colorism?
No, because you can't reverse the system simply by having emotions towards someone, right? Even if you act mean to someone, you're not reversing the social stratification that elevates lighter skin, right? And so, you know, I use this term, other people use this term. I saw Color in Me join. I was on their thesis committee, our thesis defense today. And, you know, I prefer to use the term backlash of colorism if it happens.
Yeah.
And so when we think about when white people, for example, say, oh, why are Black people so angry? You know, you're being racist towards me because you're so angry. And so we can't get mad if people who have been marginalized and excluded or demonized and stigmatized in various ways get mad about that. And so it's not that they are upending the hierarchy, they are angry about the hierarchy. They are acting out in resistance to the hierarchy. And maybe it's not the best coping mechanism. Perhaps we can argue that, but what it is at the end of the day, and it's not just another form of colorism.
Right. Okay. All right. So if we're talking about a hierarchy and people lashing out due to the hierarchy, what would be ways to start to heal, right, those feelings within our own system, right? Because at the end of the day, I know that there is intraracial colorism and there's interracial colorism, and I want you to expand on that. Well, let's expand on that first, and then let's get to a place where we can start talking about how we can heal, you know, within our own community.
Yes. So this actually goes to a question I saw pass by in the comments about the history and like why that exists.
Why was the lighter skin elevated?
Yeah, and so that has a lot to do with interracial colorism, right? So we think about like the interstate system is when the highways travel across state lines. And so interracial colorism is when colorism happens across racial groups. And so, you know, for in the African American context in particular, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna narrow it down to that. When we look at the history of colonization in Africa itself, but then especially the international slave trade here in the US, and all of that, that whole system of marginalizing Black people and oppressing Black people relied on instilling the belief that white was supreme, right? Instilling the lie that whiteness and white people and white culture was supreme above all else. And so when we started having, you know, Black people who were mixed with European descent as a result of rape and sexual exploitation, then who were also classified as Black though, right, because of the rule of hypodescent, the one drop rule, then we saw a widening, increasingly diverse range of skin tones, hair textures, phenotypes amongst Black people. And so that could have been neutral, but European colonizers, slave masters exploited those differences that were, you know, coming up amongst African Americans and showed favor to the mixed race descendants of slave masters and showed favor to people who looked more like the slave master, right? And that was both because of their beliefs about white supremacy, but also it was to convince us of their supremacy as well. And so we're going to treat the lighter skinned Black people and the mixed race Black people as better because we say, well, they have some European ancestry, so that must mean they're smarter. Or they have some European parentage or grandparents, so that must mean they're more beautiful. Are they less savage? Are they less brute, right? Are they're more sophisticated and more human, basically? Like seriously, if we get down to it. When you look at that, the history of that that fake science, the pseudoscience, and how people thought, you know, Africans were more like apes than humans. And so when someone had claim to European ancestry, then that literally humanized them in the eyes of white society. And so throughout, you know, slavery did a lot of damage to us in many ways. And so part of that damage was the internalization that, okay, well, something must be wrong with me. And we see it on a micro level, right? Like if you abuse a child, they're going to internalize that, right? And so you can imagine generations of children being born into slavery, internalizing their environment, internalizing that situation, right? Like if I look around and everyone who looks like me is a slave and is working in the field, and all these other people who look like them get to dress nice and wear fancy clothes and live and or work in the house, and you know, maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe they are better, right? And so we see that legacy continuing and playing out today. And that's part of why the intra-racial colorism exists, is because we've adopted those beliefs that were ingrained as a result of slavery and colonialism.
Yeah.
Hope people were following me.
Oh, no, you're dropping a lot of knowledge, and I appreciate it. Like all I can think about is just like passing, and how like that was a thing that people wanted to do. Like the closer to white that you could be, the better. And if you were found as a person that passed, you know, like that could kill you. You know, like that would be the end of your life. So we have to understand the history first in order for us to move forward and heal forward. Questions that
I also want to add really quickly is that when we talk about the preferential treatment that lighter skinned people received during slavery, a lot of folks say, well, they were still slaves and they still had to endure a lot of brutality anyway, right? And like that's true, but by virtue of their relationship to like an actual white person, but also because of maybe the ability to pass as white, they also had like concrete access to education, to employment, to resources, and sometimes, you know, land, forms of wealth because of that. And that wealth is generational, right? So they started to be able to build wealth for themselves and, you know, provide those opportunities for their generations that came after them as well. So it's not just like an aesthetic thing, right? A lot of people try to relegate colorism to like, oh, who's the cute girl? But colorism affects your pocketbook, it affects your health, it affects, you know, how police officers and lawyers treat you. So it is bigger than just like a beauty competition.
Yeah. One of the questions that was posed in the comments is, what can parents do to help reverse the socialization of their young children regarding colorism?
Mm-hmm. There's so many things we can do, and I think a really simple way to think about it is that for every method of indoctrinating them under white supremacy, we can use those same methods to help them unlearn that, right? And so we know that white supremacists use media, they use propaganda, right? It wasn't always TikTok and Instagram, but it was the newspapers, it was
Right.
the black and white films, it was blackface, right? And minstrel shows. And so, even music lyrics, right? When you listen to some of those Dixie songs about, down in Dixie and all the like racial propaganda, right? And so we can, one, limit how much our children are exposed to that kind of racist imagery and racist narratives, and then increase their exposure to positive, historically accurate, right? Even if you don't even think about it being positive or negative, it's historically accurate to depict Black people as intelligent and capable and beautiful, right? Like, that's just fact. But then I think an important thing, and shout out to the late great Bell Hooks, is she talks a lot about how parents have to do the work internally. And I don't want to skip over that, because I know sometimes it's easy to say, oh, well, I want to help my child love themselves. And for some people, for some families, one of the quickest, best, most effective ways of doing that is role modeling, right?
Yes.
And we know how much children learn from what they see. When you're out in public and the child says something, you're like, where you got that from? Right? And so they are paying close attention. They are paying close attention. We know, I know, because there are adults who talk to me every day about it, that even as adults, we haven't gotten there collectively, right?
Right.
We're all on a path, right? We might all be on that journey to getting there, but there's so much work we have to do even as adults. And so I think it could be a family effort. I actually created a workbook for children. Shameless plug. But part of like my encouragement is that parents do the workbook with their children, right? And not just say, oh, here, go do this while I, talk on the phone, but like, let it be a family activity that everyone can do together. And then I think another simple thing in terms of mental health for children is teaching them basic good mental health practices, right? And we know for African Americans, we have not done that collectively as a community, is talk about mental health in a very, real way, in a serious way. But that is part of the, I think, work that we have to do as well. And so I also say colorism healing is just healing. And so when you find yourself doing that work on colorism, you realize like, oh, but I'm also like less angry about things. And oh, I'm also like have more peace and I have more joy in my life. And I'm able to like connect with people more easily and I'm not as guarded. And so you see these like sort of ripple effects in other areas of your life when you start to do the work in, on colorism, I found. I don't know.
So I agree with you. I feel like everything starts with self-work. And when I completely related with you when you were talking about your the children parents first doing the work within themselves. And when they showcase the love for themselves and their skin complexion, it's like your children are automatically going to adopt that same love. And that was one of the things that immediately made me think of my mother. My mom is a very dark-skinned Panamanian woman, and colorism is, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but especially in Caribbean and Latino countries and islands, their colorism is like reigns supreme. Like literally,
Yeah.
it's so much preferential treatment for being a lighter complected. And with my mom being so dark, like, it was never a time where I like, even though she speaks Spanish, so she would start speaking Spanish and people would be like, oh, you speak Spanish? Like, what's going on? It would be confusing. And I saw how people reacted to her. Her esteem was so high, and her love for herself and her love for her community was so grand that like, it was no way that I can hate the color or the skin that I was in. It was like, look at this beautiful Black woman that like loves herself. She loves on us. She loves on all people. And at the end of the day, that's my role model, right? So that's why I'm so confident in the person that I am today, is because my parents themselves were always very confident within themselves and always continue to do the self-work needed to be great role models. So yeah, I feel like that's definitely very important. And when you start to look within, and that's all I teach about, like I coach, I'm a personal trainer. One of the things I always tell people is like, before we even start working out, like, yes, we can change the outer exterior, but nothing's going to last and nothing's going to actually be withstanding if you do not do the inner work. Like, no matter how much you change on the outside, if internally you are conflicted, if you have a battle going on, none of that is going to stick. It's always going to be revert back to the same trauma and triggers that you've always had. So when you said that, that touched me deeply. I just thought about my mom immediately, and I saw her struggle, but she never let it get to her. She always just exuded beauty in every walk of life that she was a part of. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I hope that especially the people with kids on my on this live are doing the same thing and take that into stride, because it's very important that we are the role models of the children.
So I just thought about a couple more things. I'll throw them in really quickly. One, because some people might be thinking, you know, well, I have a dark-skinned daughter, but I'm a light-skinned mom, right? And so, like, you know, me loving myself as a light-skinned mom might not have the same impact, right, that it did with your mom, right? But I think, so I'll add something else. Yes, teaching kids to love their own skin tone, but also explicitly teaching them to love all skin tones. So that's also something you can explicitly teach them, kind of like your parents, you know, they made it clear to y'all that we're gonna love everybody. But then also, I often ask, like, who comes to your house for dinner, right? Like, who do you set up play dates with, right? Are they all, you know, mixed race kids with like 2C, 3A hair, right? Or do you have them playing with kids who, one, look like them, but also look, you know, lighter, darker, have different hair textures? And then who are your friends, right? Do your friends look like them, right? If you have a dark-skinned daughter, do you have close relationships with other dark-skinned women, right? And so you don't always have to be dark-skinned to show or teach a dark-skinned girl how to love herself, but it helps if you are, again, not only checking for your own self-esteem, but checking for your own biases.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that's hard to look at sometimes for us.
And that's ongoing work, right? I always tell people, like, it has to be a step back, and you just have to review and reflect to continue to be aware, because we don't even realize sometimes that we're biased until like it's just a growing thing. Like you're never truly aware. So it's always a time, like even during the show, I had to like sit back for a second. I just thought, and I was like, no, that wasn't the case. It was just a conflict of personalities, right? But it was like, I didn't go in thinking this or that. It was just like, okay, this is what they presented as a person, and that's how I felt. That's how I felt about them. Someone asked, and just to kind of catch everybody up that's coming in here, we're exploring colorism. This is with Dr. Sarah L. Webb from at Colorism Healing, the founder of at Colorism Healing. And one of the questions that's posed is, what effective tactics do you recommend for discussing this topic with peers and potential romantic interest? That's a good one.
So I've done a few lives, so let me see if I can remember some of the particular strategies. So I'll start with peers, because, you know, let's be honest, the energy is different when it's something that's platonic than it is when something ain't platonic. So when we're talking about like peers, whether it be colleagues or like actual friends, there are a few strategies. One, I always say, you know, gauge a person's level of openness and receptiveness, right? And so I don't encourage anyone to talk to a brick wall.
Right.
So that's that. Like, I don't encourage anyone to sit there and try to convince someone who is being willfully ignorant. And so I think you just have to start to observe in those people, especially if you spend enough time with them, to gauge their level of openness to having that conversation. And one thing you can do is, if you notice something, right, like if you start to notice someone else make a comment, that's often an easy segue into saying, well, what do you mean by that? Or could you tell me more about what you just said, right? Like if you have a friend who casually says, "Ooh, girl, I don't want to spend too much time in the sun. I like my color the way it is." Just like something that people would take for granted. Start to notice those things in conversations with your peers and say, "Well, why would it be terrible if you did get a little darker, right?" And just see what they say. And then start asking them, have you heard of colorism? I always say, I'm not the only one who says this, but I like the strategy is start with questions. And so not pointing the finger, not saying, "Oh, you're wrong," not preaching at people or talking at people, but get curious. Even if you know, like, and know what it is, you can still, play, be a little curious, right? Like, can you repeat that? Because sometimes people say, "I was just joking. I was just joking." It's like, okay, you thought it was a joke. What exactly was funny about that? What part of that joke was most funny to you? Now, with romantic interest, now I have to say I'm not a relationship dating expert at all. So I'm thinking in the dating context, the one that comes to mind is, do you have a preference? It depends on your level of comfort, right?
I ask that all the time. Like, what type of person do you usually date? Like, what's your preference? Because that's a big deal. Like,
it is.
I don't want to be the first go round of a darker skinned woman.
Go. It is. It's a red flag. It is such a huge red flag when they say, I don't usually date dark skin. I'm like, no.
Yeah, like, I don't want to be your test drive.
Yes. But then also I think asking them how they feel about themselves too, because you don't want to be dating someone who might be trying to compensate or like fill a void of some sort, right? Like, you also want to gauge like their level of comfort and self-love, right? Because like, we want to date from a place of self-love, and we want the partner to come from that space as well. So like picking up on any whether it's, man or woman, picking up on their level of confidence in their own skin, I think is also really important.
Yeah, no, that's a really big deal. So since we're here and we're talking about preferences versus prejudices, let's go and on that, because that's been a big thing on just the internet, right? The TikToks, the Instagram reels, like I'll marry this, kill that, do like all these type of different choices we're making. And one of the things that went big, and viral a couple of months ago was like Danny Lee wrote a whole song talking about her being light skinned, and then we have the girl phenomenon, and it's just like these are things that are can be empowering, but then also can definitely be very detrimental. So let's talk about how we can decipher between a preference and a prejudice, because oftentimes people are like, "That's my preference." And it's just like, hey, but there might be a reason why that, like, we have to look a little bit deeper why this is a preference, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna let you go ahead and just talk.
Yeah. So what I might say is that, like, so a prejudice, one red flag, one warning sign that it's more of a prejudice than just a benign, innocent preference, is if in praising one type, you also feel the need to degrade the other type. Because let's be honest, a lot of times the people who say they have a preference for, say, lighter skinned girls, it's not just, "Oh, I find that light skinned girl attractive." It's also, "Oh, well, dark skinned girls are too hood. Y'all too ghetto." Right? And so if that's coming with like these stereotypes about people you've never met, because you ain't met all dark skinned women, so you just making blanket statements, then that's a warning sign that you might be colorist. But then, to your point, what you started to say there is that even a preference can be colorist. A preference can be racist. A preference could be sexist. And I like analogies. So I always say, imagine you go to school on the first day of school. Let's say you're in 9th grade. You're in high school. You show up in class and you have a white teacher. Let's just say Miss Griswell. Okay, Miss Griswell, 30-something-year-old white woman, brown bob, and she greets you at the door, and she's like, you know, I usually prefer to teach white students, but I think we'll be okay with you, class. Would you say that's just a preference, or would you say that's racist?
Definitely.
Right? Now, in her mind, I just have a preference for white students. I don't know why. I just think, you know, they tend to be smarter. They get in trouble less. You know, I don't have anything against Black students. Now, I'm not saying I hate Black students. I just don't prefer to teach Black students. Yeah, okay. And so people can have quote unquote preferences that are based on racist ideas, and they can have quote unquote preferences that are based on colorist ideas. And so yes, your preference can be a manifestation of colorism. And we know that preferences are socially conditioned, and a lot of times people say, oh no, it's just a biological reaction. Well, if that's the case, then how do you know you won't like a dark-skinned sister before you've seen her?
Yeah.
How do you know you would like the light-skinned sister before you've actually seen her?
Yeah.
It's just a natural biological reaction to a visual stimulus. Then you would actually need to see that person before you can say yes or no, right? So that's another warning sign. Like, are you making blatant statements about people you've never seen? And then one more thing, I'll say one more thing. There's something called classical conditioning. And so there's a human phenomenon, actually all animals, everything on the planet can have this happen, because they studied it in mice, right? And dogs. I think dogs was like the first experiment. And so if you're constantly fed one, let's say, image, and it's constantly partnered with a message of like, oh, beautiful, 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 your brain is going to equate that image with the idea of beautiful, regardless of what it actually looks like. And so that's what happens in a white supremacist society when every actress whose name is beautiful looks white, or it actually is white. And that's what happens when every actress who is plays the leading lady, who plays the love interest, is skinny and has long straight hair, right? And so we have to acknowledge the ways that, you know, your preference is suspiciously similar to white beauty standards. So I'll stop there, but yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I love that analogy and those thoughts, because I am also in the beauty industry. I do a couple of things. And one of the biggest ways for the last couple of years is like including darker skinned women when it comes to their company's foundations. So like Rihanna came out with 50, and she had like this slew full of shades that basically would service every woman and of any complexion. And that was one of the things that like a lot of companies were racing to do, was like, okay, so now since this is what the train that we're jumping on, know that African American women, you know, spend a lot of money on beauty products. Like, we're gonna go ahead and just like try to expand our foundation line. And I always just think about that when it comes to this topic, especially, and just everything in general. Is like the beauty standards, and how now you're seeing like a lot of companies are pushing darker skinned women to the forefront, that, you know, that one to the forefront, so that they're down with the brown, you know. So I just talking about that and just thinking about that, I can understand where, you know, people do start to fall into that mindset of beauty being one way. And they get sucked in, and that's why it's a continuous job of asking yourself, like, you know, is this because of society, or is this because of myself? Like, is this something that I actually love, or is it because this is something that's being pushed on me, and I'm supposed to love it because of outer influences? So I love that you addressed that. Yeah. One of the questions, I like to read like this. One of the questions that was asked by a person watching is, what, if anything, took you by surprise while teaching and studying colorism?
I'll say the first thing that took me by surprise before I actually started studying it as like a scholar, right? So when I first started writing about colorism, I hadn't done like academic research on it. I hadn't like read the books yet. And so I was kind of just looking at the Bill Duke documentary and talking from my own experience and like reading a few blog posts here and there, right? And so this was in 2011, as I mentioned, 2011 to 2012, because I didn't go back to grad school until 2014. So I had a few years when I was just like kind of in having conversations and doing some light research, let's say. And so I started my writing contest in 2013. I started Colorism Healing officially as the website in 2013. And so what surprised me was that people all over the world wanted to talk to me about it.
Right.
And I'm probably not the answer people were expecting, but growing up a little African-American girl in Louisiana, my family, my mom was the first person to graduate from college. My grandparents were sharecroppers who didn't get to high school, right? And so my family was not like this world traveled, like you come from an international family, right? And so for me, it was like South Louisiana. And so when I started blogging, even though I had gone to school in California, I did like 2 years in California, like that was the furthest I had ever traveled at that point. And so it blew my mind. I was like, what? Like these people from Brazil and from Kenya and from lots of people from India, Australia, they want to jump in the conversation too. And that's really when I was like, okay, I need to stick with this. I need to like follow this train and really explore and delve into it.
Yeah, no. In India specifically, and I think this is because I don't know who I had this conversation with, but I went to University of Houston, which is the most diverse school in the nation. So we had some of everybody that was there. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine that happened to be Indian, and he was just telling me how classism and colorism is basically the same thing. And how like if you are of a darker hue, then most likely you're going to be poor. And that's like basically all over the world. Like, darker complected people are just marginalized like in every country. So I feel like a lot of people that kind of goes over people's head, and we don't really understand because we're in this American bubble. But it's sad, and it's heartening when we discuss it and we don't realize like this isn't just a slavery thing, right? This isn't just like, oh, this is white supremacy in America. This is literally European supremacy across the world.
Yes. And it's interesting too, when you talked about your mom's experience of speaking Spanish and people being surprised, that's a remnant of colorism in those countries, right? Colorism in Latin America means the only Latin Americans you're going to see on TV look white.
Right.
Maybe J-Lo is as dark as they get. Right? But there's no representation. There's no representation of people who look like us, but also grew up speaking Spanish, right? And it's always like, I've even heard people say, in terms of being Afro-Latino, they were like, yeah, because, their mom is Latino and their dad is black. And I'm like, wait, say it again? Because, those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But because of colorism in those various countries, they've hidden their black people. They've hidden their darker skinned people from the mainstream, and they've actively promoted the more European people as their representatives.
Yeah. Yeah, if you see pictures of Panama, you'll see like lighter complected people as the face of Panama in their original garb. But it's just like, hey, so like
right.
dark skinned people built the Panama Canal. Like you guys are making your billions of dollars a year off of the backs of darker skinned people. So it's just interesting. I'm always interested in it. But I do want to get us to a place where you can start recommending things that people can do, like books that you can read, or even like coming to your blog, and just any type of resources that you can point people towards to do more research on their own, but then also start to help them with having this conversation intelligently amongst their peers.
Yes. So I'm gonna, step outside my comfort zone and completely own my greatness, I guess.
Yes.
For lack of a better word.
So you are here
Because
knowledge, and we want to know more where we can find your TED Talk. All the
because I have to acknowledge I have put in work, right? Like I've been at this for like a decade now, and I've been working hard, and I've taken a lot of backlash. I've withstood a lot of criticism, and like, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say you definitely need to check out my blogs. Follow me on Instagram at Colorism Healing, everywhere, Facebook, TikTok. Any place that you gravitate towards, you will probably find Colorism Healing on that platform. And I think that one of the first things I'm recommending is going back to that children's workbook that adults can, even if you don't have children, get that children's workbook, do some of your inner work. But if you're looking for like specific things, my blog is searchable, right? So if you want to type in workplace colorism, if you want to type in history of colorism, if you want to type in white people, like, so if you're looking to start a conversation and you want some ammo to kind of say, well, I got this little research study over here that I found on Dr. Webb's blog, you can do that. Yeah. But the other reason why I recommend the website, which is colorismhealing.com, is because I have lists of books. I have lists of movies, right? So you go to my website, you search list of movies about colorism. And really, if you just Google it, my website might pop up. But I have lists of books. I identify which ones are children's books, which ones are like adult books, which ones are fiction, which ones are like nonfiction. And so it's just, over a decade, I've compiled a lot of information for people who really want to dive deep. But a very accessible way to start is to follow me on Instagram, since we're already here.
Yes. I do want to give people a chance to ask a few questions. Oh, wait.
I see some lengthy comments. People got opinions.
Okay, no. No questions that need to be repeated. What I do want to ask personally is, why, okay, so why do you feel, and this is just for me to discuss. And I'm trying to find a nice way to to say it. But one of the things that I experienced, and I've experienced with a few people of a darker complexion, is their willingness to accept, light skin as being the look, and almost like them playing into colorism and being malleable to what society says is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
What can we say to that? What can we say to that?
Yeah, so one of my personal favorite live stream sessions, and I even have like an Instagram like carousel about it, is Internalized Colorism. Mm-hmm. And I talked about the ways that shows up, right? Like, for me, I have so much compassion, and my heart melts when I observe this or hear this. But I'll hear dark skinned women say, "Oh, I can't wear that bright color,"
Yeah.
Or I can't go natural and be dark skinned.
Yeah.
Or I have to have a full face of makeup every time because, I'm already dark skinned, right? And so feeling like you have to do more, right? You know how when the Black people say you got to be 2 times better, right? It's almost like a lot of dark skinned people have a parallel mindset that because I'm dark skinned, I have to be so superb in every other way. I have to be the most intelligent person. And that was my thing. That was my area. That's how it showed up for me. I was like, well, ain't nobody gonna be checking for me because of how I look, so I'll just be the smart, funny one, right? And so I think there is like a lot of like weight and pressure and sort of these like chains that we put ourselves into. But it does start, one, with simply recognizing that it's a lie. And so there's sometimes you have to start accepting it intellectually before it seeps into the feeling in the body. And I do think that the gateway is the intellectual knowing that this is a lie, right? And if you can latch on to that and follow that thread and continue to go down that rabbit hole of, okay, if this is a lie, then what else does that mean? Then eventually you'll be able to feel it in your body. And that's where we ultimately want to get to. Because I think so many people might already be at the point where, okay, now I know that this is wrong, but I'm just, my feeling, my heart, my spirit hasn't got there yet. And so I still don't feel confident, even though I know in some way I should. And for me, what has helped me, like in terms of like colorism, but also just my general mental health, it was affirmations. And I am working on an affirmation workbook. And when I'm working with one-on-one clients, I use affirmations a lot in my practice, because it's not just like saying positive things to yourself, right? Like I have a system and, ways to actually use it effectively, but it's based on the concept that repetition does work. The reason you don't feel confident is because of repeated negative feedback, right?
Right.
So if you hadn't constantly been represented a certain way in the media, if you hadn't constantly been teased by kids at school or rejected in some way, you wouldn't lack confidence, right? And so the repetition of the positive can help you make the leap. And then thinking about, a phenomenon I learned in psychology class, we as humans are hardwired to focus on negativity more than positive. And so for any negative piece of feedback, we have to expose ourselves to 4 to 6 pieces of positive feedback in order to overcome what the negative feedback did. And so I think people don't fully recognize the level of effort and grit that it takes. And it's like swimming upstream, right? If you imagine swimming against the tide, like you have this whole like not much more, Niagara Falls of like white supremacy just rushing down on you. And we want to be able to tell ourselves we're beautiful once and think that that'll do it, right?
Yeah.
And then I also use the analogy, because I like analogies, of grooming ourselves, right? So I say, these practices, whatever self-care practice, whatever health practice, whether it's affirmations or whatever it is for you, like you don't take a shower in January and think you're done until 2023, right? Like you're going to shower regularly, if not every day. You don't brush your teeth once a week, right? Like there are these kinds of spiritual soul practices. We have to commit to them and be patient with yourself if you don't see it after a week. Like you didn't get here in a week, so you're not going to get to your next state of being in a week either. And I actually did a story about this. It's probably gone by now. I think I might have posted it around this time, about how, vulnerable moment, like around 2012-ish, 2011, 2012, I was going through like a lot of mental health struggles. And I would wake up in the morning and I would say like, oh, I can't do this. I can't do it, right? And it was like an unconscious, like automatic response as soon as I woke up. And that's when I started taking my mental health more seriously, started doing my affirmations, going to therapy, and just like practicing, boundaries and like allowing myself to focus on me. And 7 years later, I woke up one morning and the first thought was, I love you, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought about that as being like my life. My subconscious mind is completely different now because I stuck with it. But that was 7 years, right? And most of us want to be ready by summer, right? We want to be ready by summer to like be able to wear our bright neon yellow bathing suits on the beach, right? And so maybe, you can get there depending on where you start. But if that's not where your starting point is, then practice that patience with yourself, but trust and have hope that things will change. And again, and I can talk with people offline too, or after this or whenever, but I have like strategies you can use to like measure your progress so that you stay motivated, in your process. But yeah, it's real. But I know I'm a witness, and I'm a living witness that if you commit to the work, it will work.
No, always. It's so funny because I was just talking about that yesterday on my live about when I was dealing with body dysmorphia and how like it literally took me years to get to a place where I actually looked at my body and started like appreciating the work that is done and how it looks, right? Without trying to say, oh, I need to work on this, or like always nitpicking it. And at the end of the day, I feel like the message here in the way to healing, period, is just being honest with yourself first, you know, self-awareness, of course, and then going into a place where you are committed to doing the work on a daily basis to grow from. So this was great. I didn't want to go too long because I don't want like we might have to have you back, you know.
Hey, I like the vibes. I like the vibes you have, so I'm always happy to come back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've always been hell bent on, if I see an educational gap, like filling that gap in some kind of way. I might not be able to speak to it personally, but I felt like this was needed, and I felt like you know, I feel like a lot of people are going to be able to take a lot away from this, and I'm just very thankful that you even responded back, first of all, because you know some people be acting funny on the Instagrams, but then also just coming here and just really just sharing with us your passion and sharing with us just your love and your light. So let's give the people one more time your handle, where they can find you, and then also your website where they can find you. I'm going to make sure I add it to the caption for this this live. And yeah, y'all go show Dr. Webb, Sarah, love. Tell a person to tell a person to tell a person where to find her. And let's just like go and just flood her comments, flood her posts, and let her know that we appreciate all of the information that she shared with us. You can tell that she knows her stuff, and that this is definitely something that she's working within our community from her heart. And at the end of the day, anybody that's doing things from their heart is good with me. Yeah. So one more time your handle, one more time your website, and then yeah, we'll go ahead and just exit stage left.
Okay, so it's at Colorism Healing. You can also click the name at the top, and mine will show up if you click the arrow. And then the website is colorismhealing.com.
Yes.
So Colorism Healing. If you can remember those two words, you can find me wherever.
Yeah, and if you guys had any additional questions that you were afraid to ask here, can they come in and talk to you in your DMs?
So email is better.
Okay.
A backlog of DMs. It's not that I don't respond to DMs. I just have a backlog, and I have it set to where you have to follow me to send me a DM anyway.
Yeah.
But if they want a quicker and a more sure response, email is better. Yeah. So that's Sarah at colorismhealing.com.
All right. I have one more question, and I promise you we're gonna go. But why? Like you're getting so much backlash for the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, it has a lot to do with why you got backlash for taking a beautiful picture of you and your friends. One, because there are people who benefit from colorism, and any discussion that is that might implicate them, I think, is triggering to them, right? And I even think about, in terms of the response to your photo, people who have been used to being the center of attention, people who have for so long been used to being in the spotlight and being that girl are like, well, how dare you not include me in a picture of, cute girls in the, and so it's kind of like this, the audacity to not bow down to me, or the audacity to tell me I have privilege. The privilege, that P word, that will set people off. Yeah. Say privilege. I don't have no privilege. I experience racism just like you. Oh, just like me? No, not really.
But and then the question is, how do you know that?
Well, hey, okay, that's true. Yeah, and I get to
know that. You don't even know my story, so how do you know how I've experienced racism?
People say talking about colorism is divisive, and I say no, the colorism is divisive. Yes. Like, me talking about it is how we heal that. So,
yes. All right, I'm gonna let you go. I feel like this conversation could go on and on and on.
It probably could.
We might have to do a part 2. Y'all let me know in the comments for the part 2. But yes, Dr. Sarah, thank you very much for coming on here. This means a lot to me. This wasn't me trying to justify anything about the show or anything of that sort, but I just, like I said before, I saw a gap. I saw, you know, a few people didn't really understand the definition of colorism, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, we got to talk about this. Like, we got to talk about this. So I truly appreciate you for being here, and I am definitely going to be supporting you however I can. And I want you guys, everyone that's watching, to go and support her and just really just show her love and just show our appreciation for all of the work that she has been doing and the work that she will continue to do. So thank you, Dr. Sarah.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.